Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's final session of the Neurodiversity in Education Conference. My name is Isaac Akinde. I'm one of the co-directors of Neurodiversity in Education. And today's session is going to be a great session, guys. We're talking about neurodivergence in ethnicity. I've got a great panel here today, and they're going to introduce themselves one by one, just so we know what we've got, who we're talking to, and we'll lead from there. So if I start from right to left, I have Marius.
Good evening, everyone. Marius Frank. I am Director of Education at the business called Microlink. Microlink do workplace adjustments for, I think it's been about 500,000 people over the last 30 years to make the workplace more accessible. But my background is education. I was the first black ethnic minority secondary head teacher in Bristol back in 2000. And so this is a great topic, and I'm looking forward to contributing to it. Thank you, Isaac.
Thanks very much. And can we go to Lynn next, please?
Hi, I'm Lynn McCann. I'm the, director of Reach Out ASC. We're a team of independent autism support consultants based in Lancashire. That's my accent, which is a very multicultural area. And I've been doing this work for 11 years now, and we go into schools and we support the schools, the children, the families all together to work through the system and hopefully get the needs met in school. And we do training all around the UK and anywhere that will have us about. I've worked with foster carers, social workers, businesses, because autistic people are autistic all the time, wherever they are, and so everybody needs to know about that.
Thank you very much. And we have Josh.
Yeah, I'm Josh Blackwell. I'm a new training teacher. I come from a world of retail. I've had years of experience working for multinational retails in multi-diverse teams, both neurodivergent and ethnic. I've had years of working cross-culturally with extensive teams from all over the world. And in my education, I ran with a panel of 19 students who were from 18 different countries.
So just a heads up, Josh works with me in my school. He's a new ECT in my school, so I thought it'd be great to have him and to discuss a few things about how training is for neurodivergent ECTs. And also in our school, we have a diverse ethnic group of kids. So he's just at the forefront of what we're trying to do. A lot of us here already, like Marius and Lynn, and the other person who's not here is Irene. She'll be jumping on as soon as she can. When she jumps on, she'll give her a little bit about herself. We've all been doing it for a little while, so we have a lot of experience in regards to working with different races and different cultures. So it'd be great to hear some of the feedback from all the panelists. Yeah. So Irene is here now. Irene, even if the camera's not working, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So what we've done so far is just introduced ourselves. If you want to just introduce yourself briefly, that would be great.
So I'm Irene Ogunsheta. I will see if I can figure out what has suddenly happened to my camera in the past 5 minutes. But I am working as a program lead and comms lead for a charity called The Difference. I was previously a school leader and assistant principal. I came through, in fact, their program, inclusive leadership program called the Difference Leadership Program. And we were put into alternative provision for 2 years to see what we could learn from working with children in AP and bring it back to mainstream. And I'm now part of the team that's training educational leaders to be inclusive leaders.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Irene. So how the panel is going to work is that I've got some questions which I've put together. I think I've been thinking about it for a little while, and there's some questions that I've put together which I think have been really relevant to our panel discussion. And I'm going to pose the questions to the panelists and see what their responses are. I'm going to start with the first one, and I'm going to pose this one, I think, to Lynn, because I think she's got a lot of experience in this area. And the question is about disparities in diagnosis and support. So the question is, how do racial and ethnic disparities impact the diagnosis and support of neurodivergent students within the UK education system. I've got a bit of data from this as well, which I think Lynn can really speak to. And the data is from the Centre of Research in Autism and Education. It's reported that BAME stroke global majority of children are often diagnosed later, and in 2022, NHS reports suggest disparities in neurodevelopment assessments by ethnic minority students were very low. So if you can just elaborate on that for us, Lynn, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, and it's interesting, is it? Here I am, a white woman, in the middle of all this. And actually, because I work in Lancashire, we have a very ethnically diverse county. And I was just ranking a list of, like, in the last few years, the different cultures that I've worked with in families. So I have had South Asian, Chinese, Polish, Latvian, Indian, Pakistani, Saudi Arabian, Russian, Nigerian, and Caribbean heritage, and probably others as well, but those are the top of my head. So what's really important to me is to really help everybody be able to have the same access to things like, a diagnosis. So I've made a bit of a list of things that I think are the barriers in my experience. And I think first one we have to talk about is teachers and professionals' biases and their lack of understanding of how things might present in the families and in the children, particularly, like, we have quite a lot of refugee communities, and there are big language barriers and cultural barriers as we're still getting to know where they're from. And obviously a lot of them will have gone through traumatic experiences. So they come, and we have teachers who might not have enough experience about autism in the first place to recognise the signs, although that's getting much better with good training, but also the families themselves dealing with lots of issues. I've really learned a lot from Vanessa Swaby, or Vanessa Bob, as she's in a lot of publications. I'm got to know her during lockdown, and we've become really good friends since. But her experience around, the kind of biases against her family, being a Black family, and having sort of assumptions about the behaviours for her children that weren't connected to autism or ADHD, but connected to bad behaviour, I think it really has to be addressed. So I think that's probably culturally in our schools, we're not aware enough of different cultures. However, I work with some schools that are really hot on this and very good. So it's just a disparity between different areas that's a big barrier, first of all. And I think the second part of that is, I kind of alluded to, is the families themselves. If they're from a culture that where autism isn't that well known, or there is stigma attached to it, then it takes us a different approach to working with that family to help them accept that support within their family, and to take that journey forward for assessment. Because again, I hate the assessment process. It's very negative. It's all about what somebody can't do, and that is a huge thing to accept about your child, this big list of things they can't do. I work quite differently. We always start with what they can do and look at what barriers there are, but not everybody does that, do they? I think as well, within the autism diagnostic criteria, that again is very kind of Western based, isn't it, in terms of how it describes some of the difficulties. Again, I just don't like the whole language around it, but it is, again, looking at things that are on the outside. And I love Donna Williams' quote about, we shouldn't be looking at the outside, we should be looking at what the processing is like for that person on the inside. But our diagnostic assessment processes don't allow for that as much as we really need them to. So within that, they're looking at Western type behaviours, Western type social interaction, for example, and therefore making probably quite wrong judgments on some of our children through that. The other barrier, I think, for a lot of families from different cultures is around the actual processes and language that we use within the system. So there's so many hoops to go through, isn't there, for an assessment, so much waiting list, so many questionnaires and things to fill in, which actually might not make a lot of sense to, especially if English isn't somebody's first language. And so we don't have very many materials that are written in other languages through our diagnostic process. And that's really frustrating. So it's very easy for families to say, well, I just don't understand this, I'm giving up. And I've known that quite often. And we've had to go back and work through them and give them extra support to go through that service. I think it is difficult that in our country, there is a myth, because it is a myth, that you have to have a diagnosis to have support. And some people are still perpetuating that myth. But actually, if we can work with a family to understand their child and what support will help them thrive, that should go on anyway, shouldn't it? But that's probably an answer to a different question.
Yeah.
So I just think, there's a lot of barriers put in place that I think if you're not confident in the language or the culture of the Western, UK, then actually it can be difficult to keep going through that till the end of where you get that diagnosis.
Yeah.
That's probably enough to say about that to give other people a chance.
Yeah, but it's great answers, great responses, because like being African myself and being born in Nigeria and coming to the UK, and myself having ADHD dyslexia, my parents weren't very clued up in regards to neurodiversity at all, and I had a lot of challenges when I was a kid, and obviously I presented differently most probably at school, and when my parents found out about it, it was more about he needs to behave more, or he doesn't understand, he's just not trying hard enough, and understanding that whether you're black, white, Asian, whatever race you are, understanding ethnicity is important when it comes to diagnosing what the support the child needs to have, and I think it's really important whether you're an ECT or seasoned teacher to either be trained and then retrained and understand how different ethnicities will understand what neurodiversity is. Yeah, so thanks very much for that. Thanks very much for that, Lynn. Great response. I'm going to go to Irene. I think because of the work you do with the difference and all the other bits and pieces, I think this would be a great one for yourself, Irene. It's about cultural bias in educational testing. Yeah. So the question is, how do cultural biases in the UK educational testing impact the identification of neurodivergent students from ethnic minorities and backgrounds? And some of the data source in that, which I found, just to put a header on that, is the UK education system has been criticised for biases in the standardised testing model, especially in how special educational needs are assessed. Research from the Institute of Education highlights that BAME students are more likely to be identified with behavioural difficulties, whilst white students are more often identified with learning difficulties, indicating potential cultural bias in assessment. So can you give us just a brief discussion in regards to what your response would be to that, Irene?
So I think it links to what Lynn was saying. If you think about the disparities in diagnosis, it can start with, for example, having access to a GP, that kind of knowledge of how to access services, especially for families that newly arrive. Then because the ways of getting assessed are through your GP, through the school, and also parental awareness. So if your parent lacks the awareness, you don't have access to a GP or additional services, you have to get it through your school.
Yeah.
You already know there's bias. I think off call, there was an article in The Guardian a couple of years ago about, maybe it was 2021, about bias in educational assessments, and that's, GCSEs, testing, teachers assessing children, that showed up especially for disadvantaged and SEND children. So we can already see bias in the way we, for example, mark work, the way we perceive achievement, which can then show up in what we expect in the classroom, if you see what I mean. So we have these cultural norms and what we expect in the work they produce, and therefore the behaviours that they have to show in order to achieve that. So thinking about those biases, if I'm dependent on the school to notice my needs, because my parents aren't maybe able to do it, I maybe don't see the doctor, for example, often enough. I think also the assessments themselves, SEND assessments often carry cultural biases within them. So it's not just the members of staff, assumptions about behaviour. So for example, eye contact. I wasn't, for example, raised to look adults in the eye, and I know that's common with other families and cultures. Gestures, so for example, body language, imaginative play. That's not necessarily something that you see in every cultural context. So the assumptions that the assessments themselves carry, I don't know how many of you have filled in some of those assessments yourselves. And within that, I see things. So, for example, I come from a family and a culture that values direct communication. Just say what you mean.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily reflect neurodivergence. I mean, I know I am, but I just see it within not just my family, just within my wider culture. The way Yoruba people communicate, even though we do like, proverbs and sometimes saying things that are vague, if someone's, asking you to do something, it's very clear what they want. And within British culture, like growing up, I found it difficult sometimes to understand what was being asked of me, and also found what was coming back at me. The way I communicated was often perceived as too direct. So I think that can also play a part in it, as the assumptions about how people are supposed to behave. And that goes to the parents as well as for the children. I think the communication with parents can also get in the way and slow things down if there's tension between the school and the family.
Excellent. Thanks very much. I think from my experience as well as a teacher and looking at the kind of students I've taught in the different schools I've worked in, sometimes it depends on the type of neurodiverse need they have. So, for example, I am ADHD and I'm inattentive, but you have some people who are hyperactive, and depending on how that particular student is, you're going to present them in a different way. And obviously, like you said with ethnicity, being very loud and boisterous is a very Nigerian trait. I'm a Nigerian and we're quite loud people. And I could do that because I feel nervous or scared in an environment. That's because that's what my nature is as a neurodiverse person. But then it doesn't mean that, I'm that kind of person. I might just have a need that needs to be addressed, or I could be very quiet and be very inattentive. And obviously the difference between male and females in schools as well, adults as well, that's got to play a part as well. So I can imagine all of us who work in education can give an example of a bias that you might get in testing. So when you've tested that child, whether you're a Senko and you're going through assessment, if you don't understand the ethnicity very well of that particular child, it could be quite biased in regards to the actual results that you might get. Yeah.
I just wanted to, if very briefly, just if I speak directly to school teachers in that, if you see there's double SEMH diagnosis in Black Caribbean children.
Yeah.
And I don't know if any of you can attest to it, but often you then, especially working in AP, those children would come to us and we'd then see beyond that was a missed opportunity to see autism or ADHD, because it was the behaviours that were focused on. So if school staff could really consider, when you're seeing that SEMH diagnosis, is there possibly a co-occurring neurodivergent condition that you're not seeing because, as you said, you're looking at behaviours that don't necessarily fit your cultural and perceived norms.
Yeah. It could even be with dyslexia and they're not very comfortable with reading or writing, and they start playing up because of that, and you think it's behavior issues, but actually it's because they're quite nervous about actually reading out something or spelling correctly, and they want to feel bad in front of their friends, they be out of face, that kind of stuff. So again, it's really knowing that individual child as well, and making sure the teachers are trained well enough to actually assess that as well. Thanks very much, Irene. Thanks very much for that. So Marius, a man with extreme experience. This question, I think, will be a great one for you. It's about access to educational accommodations, SEM provisions. The question: are neurodivergent students from certain ethnic backgrounds less likely to receive SEN provisions in the UK? What does the data suggest? Some data that I have from there is, for example, the Department of Education SEN statistics shows disparities in the allocation of education, health and care plans by ethnicity. So I know you've worked with some of that as well. So can you just give us a brief insight of, your experience with that, please? You're just on mute at the moment, Marius. Sorry about that.
I'm very, very, very sorry. Yes, I'm ready. The big pause. It's a fascinating topic because I do believe that the statistics don't actually tell a full story because of the way the statistics are processed. Exclusion data is done per 10,000 young people. EHCP data is also processed per 10,000 young people, and so you get a very generalized score. But there's a huge however here. There's an additional complexity, I believe, which comes down to culture and money.
Yeah.
When I became a head teacher in Bristol in 2000, I asked the local authority to do a postcode geomap of where the EHCPs were. They were clustered in the richest areas of Bristol, which happened to be the white, predominantly white areas of Bristol. Why? Because those parents were the ones that chose to pursue the local authority for an EHCP. They were the ones that chose to take legal action to secure the EHCP. And families that didn't have that kind of backup, that knowledge, and that awareness of process simply did not get the provision that their children deserved. It was an interesting activity because after I asked for that data, it was subtly ignored afterwards because it was actually an embarrassment. And I actually think it is a national embarrassment if we went down that route. To see Lynn, you do unmute. I'm thinking, does that triangulate with some of your observations working across an area?
Yes, that's all I can say to that. Yes, yeah, and yeah.
No, absolutely.
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because I can't blame anybody for wanting to fight for their child and get the best for their child. But there are middle class, there are people who have more skills in order to do that and more knowledge about how to navigate the system. And we have come some very deprived, poor areas in Lancashire as well, where I think that data would probably be replicated as well.
Totally. No, thank you for that. The other factor is the conflating complexities of financial and disadvantage of poverty, and when you layer that on top of an actual sort of, if you like, a special educational need, you get a conflation. Some young people will not get an assessment because they haven't been in school to get a graduated response, which is needed to get the evidence trail for an EHCP. And that absenteeism is sometimes not their fault. It might be the family complexities, the challenges they're under, the multiple traumas that these marginalized communities have. And sadly, many of the young people, as Irene and Lynn have attested, are out of school because of behavior issues that have been misinterpreted as persistent disruptive behavior, when the underlying issue is one of some kind of need. I've got a very quick slide to share before we move on. So I'll do my best to try and work this system, and this is a system. This is a graphic I prepared for working with some youth offending services across the country, and it was very well received. So here we go. Right. So I call it the communication iceberg. You may see these things as inappropriate, aggressive behavior, or no reply when being questioned. I wrote this for Youth Justice Services, and some young people at the point of being sentenced will laugh at a magistrate. You have self-harm, and this is not just the more rest of the day, which might be scarring. It's about putting yourself at risk, and that could be through drugs, through alcohol, through carrying weapons. Repetitive use of words and phrases. It's what you can see, but what you cannot see under the surface could be a whole range of emotional, social, and special educational needs issues. Young people might know that they are different, but they don't know why. And many choose to hide their, if you like, mask their issues behind layer upon layer of front. What you see in the classroom, in the community, is the front. You see that You could call it inappropriate behaviour, but how about just calling it behaviours? You can see it behaviours that actually mask what's happening to that young person, what's happening in their lives. The teachers see it, their community sees it, but what those young people are actually doing is protect themselves. They were immediately associated as a behaviour problem, when actually, if you can just stop and think, great things can happen. One example before I go on to the next person, a colleague for Milton Keynes Youth Offending Service. He is a tireless advocate for speech, language, and communication needs in youth justice pathways. He managed over 10 years to secure 7 or 8 days of speech, language, and communication therapist time for the schools in Milton Keynes. He offered every single school in Milton Keynes a free, detailed speech and language assessment for any child getting fixed term exclusions. Right? Over 90% of the children who were coming up for fixed term exclusions had speech, language, and communication needs. And by the schools meeting those needs early enough, fixed term exclusions went down by 60%. That's all I've got to say.
Wow. Do you know what? Some of that information you just given, it really opens your mind, because the thing is, if you understand that speech and language could be at the forefront of how people then communicate, that's where we can start making a difference, isn't it?
Absolutely, because communication, what so many needs, whatever the need, we want our young people to be independent in the workplace, in life.
Yeah.
And communication is the key.
And the thing is, in my particular school, and I think Josh could attest to this, in our class, you could have at least, I'm not going to lie, you have 30 kids in the class, 15 different nationalities in that one class. And some of them in my school, because in our area, our school has some of the kids that are either taken out from other schools, managed moves. The EAL is quite high in our school. So trying to understand whether that child is just doesn't understand or they have a need is challenging. If they can't be tested correctly, that's where the barriers start to begin to build, isn't it? So what you just said there is very powerful, actually. It's about, from what I can see, understanding the need for speech and language first, and then communication. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marius, there. Josh, so ECT, new to education. Us oldies over here have been here for a little while. And it's going to be great to understand from your point of view, Josh, what you see, what training that you're having in regards to ethnicity and neurodiversity. Yeah, my question to you is teacher preparedness and training. So how are we preparing our teachers and how is the training? So are UK teachers adequately trained to identify and support neurodivergent students from diverse ethnic backgrounds? And some of the research I've found as well states here, this is from the National Association of Special Educational Needs, NASEN. They indicate that UK teachers training often lacks focus on cultural competence alongside SN education. My question to you, my man, is have you seen, have you witnessed, have you been, has it been added to your ECT program?
Yeah, so obviously from my training, in terms of this, we do a lot on neurodivergent and we do a lot on ethnic background, but the actual linking of the subjects is so minimal. It very much is, and I went through my whole program over the last few days and I totted up the actual allocated time. It goes at max to 2 hours over the whole of my course.
2 hours.
2 hours in the linking of both of those together, and it is very minimal in terms of what it goes over. And as I suspect with a lot of the training, it will be focusing more on categorizing the neurodivergency than anything else, because we've had one session and we spent a lot more time on that than actually linking it. To be honest, there's an example I've got from our school. I've witnessed a SEN pupil. I wasn't aware they were SEN, no one did at the time. They were observed being quiet. I spoke to a fellow teacher and they were spending a lot of time on their own, and I started to notice it. And I asked the question, oh, is that child all right? Is everything all right with them? Oh, yeah, they're fine. It's just a cultural thing. It's very much a cultural thing that they had. They're just going to sit on their own. And I brought it up to another member of staff. They investigated, and they're now checking him for neurodivergency. Mainly because they suspected him to have autism. There was a few other links, and it was my link that led them on to actually looking at referrals at other aspects. So very much so, it's happening right in front of me.
Well done. And the thing is, and I don't think the school's different to many other schools. Whereas in any school I've been in, yeah, through my training and through the 3 schools I've worked in, you have a teacher's folder, and in that folder you should have your class and what needs each person has in your class. So it is actually down to the schools to make sure that teachers like yourself who are at ETC or teachers who are seasoned understand the kids in their class. So having that teacher folder, which our school does have, every teacher in our school has to have a teacher's folder. And when we do that, when they do their walks through the school, they ask us, "Can I see your teacher's folder? You know, what things you have in place for that particular child." But sometimes, I'll be honest with you, those who've been in education, Lynn, Marius, Irene, how often do teachers really use that folder?
And there's a yes button here, and the yes button is your teacher folder trumped by your school's behaviour policy?
Yeah.
So many schools still have 0 tolerance, binary, 1 strike and out, isolation rooms, withdrawal rooms as the first point of discipline. Now, if that is your first point of contact before you stop, relate to and talk to a child, then you're never going to get to your folder.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so I think for yourself, Josh, just to pose that question, just to elaborate, what do you think needs to change then? What would you like to see more as an ECT when it comes to linking neurodiversity and ethnicity?
I think it would be a great opportunity because we're with the introduction of the ITAPs, the intensive training programs, they would be an ideal area where they could include a whole day based around this, and they could include part of ethnicity and neurodiversity all in one day as well, so that it encompasses the whole aspect and it shows us the reality of everything. We could have experts who come in, do all the speeches like yourselves on the panel today. Honestly, the stuff I've learned tonight is more so than what I've learned on some of my training, which is the amazing part of it all.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. Great responses. I'm going to jump back to Lynn because I like hearing her voice. She's got a lot to talk about.
Is that my accent?
I'm partial on accent sometimes, yeah. So Lynn, you work a lot with parents, yeah, as you spoke at the beginning, and the question I have for you is parent and community advocacy. Yeah. So, how do parents and caregivers from minority ethnic groups navigate the UK education system? We're talking about EAL language here as well. When advocating for their neurodivergent child, what challenges do these parents face?
Yeah, quite a lot, isn't there? There is a report done by the National Autistic Society, which was in 2014, so even 10 years ago, and I don't think anything's really changed a lot. And it's called Diverse Perspectives. So I've got a copy there. But it's really worth a read for most, educators, really. But one of the things that, a few other things came up was just knowledge about the systems. I mean, that's hard enough for all of us because I think in the last 10 years they've got more and more complicated, more and more barriers. So we've kind of, as a team, been looking at, so the way we work with parents is through the school. So for us, our service is based on bringing everybody together, working with parents together with the school. So the first thing is actually to reach out to parents. And, we have had to learn how to do that depending on their language, and it's difficult. We often have to find a translator in the school to be able to talk to parents and say, this, you know, this woman's coming in to see your child, this is what it's about. It's often scary for them to think my child needs a specialist. What does that mean? So the whole language around that, and we're still working on developing our communication through that, particularly when there's lots of different languages. I have been trying to research to see what languages are. Sorry, what resources there are about autism in different languages. And some of the problems I find is that I don't know whether those are neuro-friendly or not, because it could actually, you know, if I can't read that language, I don't know whether I can trust that publication to the families. So we need to do a lot of help with that, really. So I think there's a lot going on. So for parents, when they often notice that their child may be having difficulties or maybe a bit different, and knowing where to go. So that they're often actually, school is the best place for them to go, because that's the contact that they have every day, isn't it? So often schools are really good resources to start that process. But I also find that the support groups, so parent support groups in our area, are generally white culturally based, and it may be that we ought to spend a bit more time supporting more culturally diverse parent support groups as well. And I think understanding the culture around the response of the community to being autistic as well, and that word autism and all the sort of, so families have said to us that the community, when they can be very supportive when they hear that a child's autistic, so actually it can be their best support of all, or they can actually come and say, actually there's a lot of stigma and we don't want to tell people. So we have to understand each personal family, what they're going through in that. I have a big list of things here that I've come across with parents. So I'm trying to form it into some, and I have ADHD myself. I was diagnosed 3 years ago. So when I get very, very excited about a topic, sometimes I need to take a pause. So trying to go back to your question, how do they navigate the education system with help that needs to be in the right language, structured very well for them in the steps that they need to go to? I often send parents via the IPSI website if they're struggling with a knockback, you know, for a needs assessment or any problem with that EHC pre-process. And again, the language in that needs to be supported and helped through as well. So even what we do have, if you're not being able to read English, it's going to be a big barrier, isn't it? I think one of the things that we've tried to do in our team is actually set up parent groups and parent meetings, like a coffee morning or something in our schools, where we are open and friendly and just let people come and mill and ask us questions. And that's, really us reaching out to parents. And I think a lot more professionals could do with the time to do that. But in doing that, have materials available, that are diverse. I'll tell you one thing that I've done in terms of my training is I've been through everything and made sure that I've got good role models and different cultural pictures in my training. And I think, that's one thing I can do as a professional. But I'm hesitating, and I'm hesitant because everybody's struggling with the system. And I think if you're from, different cultural background, it's even worse because it's just a mess. I don't know what else to say. It really is a mess. And what Maria said about, the middle class white parents who are getting through that system, oh, good luck to them. And I can't blame them. But it's just then creating this backlog of people who can't access that in the same way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Am I making sense? Because I feel I've made
100%. Look, seriously, 100%. Because I'll tell you what, Irene and Lynn, sorry, with my ADHD, names to me just disappear. So
me too. It's fine. They're written down, so it's okay.
So in my school currently, next week I've got a parent meeting. So I run parent meetings in my school for ADHD dyslexia parents. So I found, and I did some last year as well, that I do after school sessions. So I invite the parents in to have a discussion about their child as a group. So then if they have the same type of ethnic background, they can, see there's other people in the school have similar challenges, and that's the thing I'm focused on this year in my school, is that having parent meetings as well. So do you know what, the tea one you talked about is great. Having a tea morning, I wish most schools would do that.
Well, I work a lot more in primary schools, I think, as well. We do work in secondaries as well, but currently most of my schools are primary. So it's actually more of a community within a primary school that's easier to bring parents in. And some of my kind of very culturally diverse schools are already doing this kind of stuff already. So fitting in something around neurodiversity and SEN is actually quite easy in those schools. But it's just, it's different everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, you're definitely right with that. So getting the parents understanding and making sure that they understand the actual context of what you're trying to say about their child, have the right person to speak to them in maybe their language, even if you can, is going to be a barrier breaker, isn't it?
Do you know what? I'll tell you what, I have a short course on explaining the education, health and care plan kind of system. And if anybody wants to come alongside me and do that and put that in, translate it into another language, I'd be more than happy to work with them, because, to have those resources together and recorded would be great, wouldn't it, that people can use.
Excellent. There you go. A plug right there. If you need any help with that,
or
the lady.
Or use assistive technologies. Yes. Have you come across immersive reader yet, Lynn?
No, I'm a bit of a I'm old. I'm only just learning about these things. It's still like a magic wand sometimes.
Immersive reader is free. It's free, and it'll translate it for you. Look it up.
Send me a link.
Lynn, I'll tell you what. If you look at the what I did yesterday with my wife, Francis Akinde. So we did a session yesterday. It was about AI and artificial intelligence. Yeah, there's lots of stuff out there that you can use that can talk. It can talk to you as well. So you've got Dragon Dictator, that kind of stuff. So there's lots of software that you can advise parents to use to translate as well. So definitely assistive reader is great. And Microsoft got a lot of tools that you can use for that as well. And most people will have Microsoft on their laptops or.
Yeah. Well, I'm not too old to learn, so
you're never too old. You're never too old to learn. Yeah. So great. Thanks for that, Lynn. Irene. So, mental health and well-being linked with with neurodiversity and ethnicity. Quite a good one here. So, the question is, mental health and well-being. How does ethnicity impact the mental health and well-being of neurodivergent students in the UK? And are there specific challenges faced by students of colour with mental health and neurodiversity?
I think we all probably know that students with neurodivergent conditions and diagnoses face mental health challenges at higher rates than the general population as a group. So, for example, you'll see a rate of about 30% persistent absence, for example, just among children with SEND, especially SCMH. And as I said, that's often comes with other things. 7 in 10 autistic children are known to have one mental health condition, and I think the rate is 4 in 10 have 2 or more. So if we just take it there, just thinking that generally children with neurodivergent conditions generally experience mental health conditions. But if I use the young offending population as an example, because stats, as Marius said, are really difficult to find, and I think Josh touched on it as well. It's siloed. You'll have your FSM statistics for schools, your SEND statistics, your ethnicity, they're never brought together. And you see that in wider research. It's really hard to find anything, even within the medical field, that kind of helps you figure out who is getting these diagnoses, when and how. So ADHD, I think it's 12 to 19% of the young offending population. Autism, similar, 15%. Dyslexia, actually higher, 40 to 50, just over 50%. So we're already seeing within that population there's higher rates of neurodivergence. Then it's about 71%, 72% have a mental health condition. And Black Caribbean boys overrepresented within that group. So I think even though they make up 12% of sentences, They make up 29%, I think, of the population that are actually in young offending institutions that have been taken into custody. So within that, you've got to be able to pick out that there's got to be a higher prevalence of mental health conditions for those young people. And a lot of them who entered the system were not diagnosed until they got to the system. I think for me, I can identify with a lot of young people having ADHD myself that was only diagnosed a year ago. I can look back to my schooling, the high sense of anxiety I had. School made me very anxious, worried. I felt weird. I knew there was something different about me. And everyone I've spoken to with ADHD, dyslexia, or autism has said they felt something. So whether it's because they didn't quite do what teachers were asking them to do, or constantly getting in trouble. I know, for example, at home, I kept getting in trouble for things I don't know how to change. And having that lack of control and feeling not heard, you take that then to the broader issues for communities where there's often a higher rate of disadvantage. So if we look at Black Caribbean, I just wanted to compare to, I hope I've got time, to communities that I know I've worked with, but I don't necessarily belong to. So then therefore I can take out my own personal bias. But Black Caribbean girls are 2 times as likely to be permanently excluded. And GRT girls, I think it's 4 times more likely. Then if you look at the rates of FSM for Black Caribbean children, it's gone up from before the pandemic from 28 to 45. And GRT, it's about 6 for traveller children, sorry, it's 65% also. Irish traveller children, I meant, sorry, not GRT. Then if we also look at the representation for the diagnoses, Black Caribbean children are overrepresented and traveller children under. So I don't, and see if you can see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the mental health, Black Caribbean people are the most likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act. I was quite shocked by that statistic. But also there's higher rates of suicide and mental health diagnoses amongst the traveller community. So we've got within these 2 groups, one that's overrepresented with diagnosis, one that's under, yet we're still seeing similar trajectories for them where mental health is concerned. And that brings me to think what we're doing in schools. I like the phrase instead of hard to reach, seldom heard. We need to look at our families and our children, not just define them by free school meals, because that also can lead to low expectations. We need to stop defining them by poor behavior or, mental health, like the parent that comes that, people don't want to talk to because they don't like the way they behave. I think schools really do need to look at things like bias-informed practice. It's really helped some of the people we've trained to think about the fact we're all biased and not to feel afraid of using that word, because that helps you to think about your blind spots. We don't know the children as well as we think we do, and they're not just bits of data on a graph. I also think looking at trauma-informed practice kind of helps people understand, because there's high rates of trauma, even just going through the system for getting a diagnosis for your child can cause trauma for some of these families.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I think, looking at better support in order to get a diagnosis for children, better training for teachers to be able to spot the signs of whether it's mental health distress, whether it's neurodivergent conditions, whether it's safeguarding, but being able to see behaviours as more of a sign of something that I need to communicate with others, with colleagues. Learn the family, so rather than jump to conclusions. So for example, I've noticed a lot of people assume your child has ADHD because they're running around a lot. Whereas like Isaac said, I was the same. I was one of those quiet kids that was just daydreaming out the window most of the time. So you would have missed me and you would have missed Isaac. So, rather than making assumptions, recognize that we actually have to learn our children and our families first before jumping to any of the conclusions that we may come to. I think that's absolutely part of what causes the distress that we see in our young people, is they don't feel heard and they don't feel seen.
I would love to jump in here, if I may, on two aspects of what Irina said. First of all, there's the aspect about trauma, and also the impact of trauma on the. Every now and again, a piece of research comes out which changes one's vision and perception, and I'd like to just share, just for 2 or 3 minutes, what it was, because I think there's so much learning from this that I think people will find tremendous. I'm going to share my screen in a second. Basically, the research comes from the Anna Freud Institute. I think some of you are probably familiar with the Anna Freud Institute and the work they do. An amazing place. I'll just start off with a statistic, which was done from 2012. Someone did try and put all the big data together and came up with that conclusion. I won't even read it out, but it just gives you an idea of the disproportionalities that we sometimes have to deal with.
Wow.
Isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible? Yeah. Okay. This was the bit of research work, and I will share the link in the chat pane to this amazing presentation from Professor Eamon McCrory. The first thing they did was look at traumatized young people and simply show them faces, pictures of faces from neutral to sad or neutral to angry. They looked at a group of young people who'd been traumatized and a group of young people who hadn't. When they compared the curves for sad, they were identical, but the curves for an angry face showed that those young people who'd been traumatized had altered threat processing. They were more likely to perceive an angry face, even in a two-dimensional picture, than a child that had not been traumatized. Amazingly, the parts of the brain that lit up in these children were identical to soldiers coming back from Afghanistan. They were hyper vigilant to threat. They were scanning the environment for threat far more readily. And of course, when you scan the environment for threat and you perceive threat, you go into something called the amygdala hijack. That's when your body gets used to fight or flight, and this altered threat processing can cause all sorts of issues, increased likelihood of interpersonal conflict, and as you've quite rightly noted, Irene, psychiatric vulnerability. It could lead to mental health issues later in life. So what does that science mean? Okay. It means a young person on the left there who has had multiple adverse childhood experiences, including ethnicity and poverty, who might be neurodivergent and has learned to mask it, who has confirmation bias based on stop and search, peer pressure, family experiences, social media, all media, has no trust in adults and is probably suffering from burnout from masking, meets a teacher with confirmation bias based on classroom chat, media, middle-class expectations of good behaviour, academic outcomes, firsts in schools, and disciplinary procedures, who's probably overworked and overstretched. The dialogue leads sometimes to the amygdala hijack, and that young person is more likely to be put into that pastoral behavioural bin, silo, rather than looking for special educational needs. It's really interesting. Little bits of science are coming through now, really sort of authentic science, which really makes you think. It's not as simple as we'd like it to be, but if you can reduce it to where those stress points are for young people, where those trigger points are, and as my colleagues have said, where the bias is, you're more likely to reach into every child and look for strengths rather than look for issues.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martin and Irene. Some really strong and powerful information there. And I think those who look back at it and are listening right now can really take something out from there. You know, and that leads to actually looking at how discipline is used. We've got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to put it out to the whole panel. Does anyone want to talk about how you feel discipline in regards to ethnicity? And now we've talked about how students can be perceived to be behavioural, have behaviour issues rather than having diverse issues. How does discipline play into that when it comes to the school environment?
Oh, anyway, that's about 2 hours for each of us, I think. Yeah.
Right. If I can say 1 minute.
Right.
Make it
switch a behavior policy to a relationship-based policy. simple. That's all you have to do.
Thank you. Lynn.
I was going to say, I've just, there's a school that I work with in East Lancashire that has a behaviour relationship policy, and it's a very culturally diverse school, and I just love that, you know, and the whole ethos there. But it's just, you know, it's too rare. And we know enough now. We know much more about neurodiversity and cultural diversity, and we know so much more about children and the way they react to things and their nervous system. Why aren't we just creating policies that keep up with that research? And that's very frustrating for me. I've been in education a long time, 30 odd years, and I just feel like we're just really stuck on this, and we should have moved on a long time ago.
And Josh, as an ECT, what kind of challenges do you think you're going to face in regards to behaviour in your classroom, in regards to ethnicity and neurodiversity?
I faced it already. Last week, I faced my first big challenge in this. I found a student. He was not a managed move, but as Isaac said, we get a big influx of students regularly throughout the year. He's come from a disadvantaged background. He was branded as low ability, stuck in one of my bottom tier groups. I started looking over his work just to check him. He's great at depth by miles. He is one of the brightest students I've taught this year so far. He understood all the maths we've done, and he was going to me, "Can I have some more? Is there anything else I can do?" And I was giving him more. And I gave him a much more complex, which was a year 11 question, and he was able to answer it in seconds. So it really is, there is a bias that I've seen already in teaching that exists and needs to be overcome very quickly. And as you said before, it should have happened years ago.
I think from what you just said, if he wasn't challenged, that's where the behaviour would have come in place. Now he's been challenged by yourself and said, "Look, you know what? I can see that you're more able, and you've given him extra work." His behaviour hasn't been an issue because he's been challenged more, and that's where he's neurodivergent. He might be ASD and think, "You know what? I get this. I'm very quick." But if you don't challenge him, that's where the behaviour's going to get. He's going to get bored, and he's going to cause behaviour issues. But you haven't noticed his neurodiversity. So thanks so much for that. Irene, anything quickly? 1 minute.
The behaviour you see is not the diagnosis. It's usually communicating something. So look beyond it. Don't take it personally. Be curious, and also really look at student voice, and also go to your staff. Some of them are also deeply masking. We are everywhere. We are among you. So make it an open space for communication with your staff, students, and families to find out how they're finding the school experience and what benefits the neurodivergent child is very likely to be good for everyone else.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. That is great. And you know what? I think some of the questions that we've posed today, we could talk about for ages. You know, I apologize to the community that we hadn't had enough time to delve into some of these, but I've got even more questions that we could have asked. And I know the panelists have said to me, "Isaac, you know, I want to take these back to my school or to my workplace, and can we, you know, do more?" So if you do have comments, ladies and gents, people out there, stick it on our platform. Go into Neurodiversity in Education, write down your comments, put it on the YouTube. We can then obviously have a look at that and try and obviously make that communication and that conversation a broader conversation. But I really do appreciate all the comments and all the insight from such great people. You know, I'm very proud to have you guys on my panel, and I think, you know what, some of the stuff you said today can really help others. You know, so I think all of us have shared our own lived experience as well as our educational knowledge. And I really appreciate your time and your effort. You know, we've got literally 30 seconds left, but I think, you know, this conversation, like I said, could go on forever, but it has to end somewhere. Yeah. So thanks very much, guys. Does anyone have anything else to say? Any questions, Simon, on the chat? I've got our magic Simon behind us, just on the chat there. Nope, looks like we can move on. So thanks very much. Appreciate it. We'll see you again soon. Thanks very much, everyone.